All right, so we're diving into the power of inversion today.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this whole idea of basically like using failure as a roadmap to success, it's pretty wild.
It really is. It kind of turns everything on its head, you know? We're so used to like chasing solutions, focusing on what we want to happen,
Right.
but we often completely miss those potential problems lurking in the shadows.
Yeah, it's almost like we have these blind spots when it comes to risk,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like that story in the book about the coffee shop owner, the one who had this like perfect vision, but she almost went bankrupt
No, yeah, yeah.
because she didn't stop and ask herself, like, how could this all go wrong?
Classic example. Our brains can really trick us, you know?
Totally.
We get so fixated on the positive, the exciting stuff that we miss those crucial red flags.
Okay, so then how does like this inversion thing, how does it actually help us see those blind spots?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine you're building a bridge, right? If you only focus on how to make it stand, how to make it strong, you might miss a critical weakness, something that could cause the whole thing to collapse. But if you start by asking, how could this bridge fail?
Hmm.
You're forced to think about all those potential points of failure. And then you build in safeguards. You make it more robust.
So it's not about being like a pessimist, right? It's about being smart.
Exactly. It's strategic caution. And this idea, this concept, it's not even new.
Really?
Yeah. The book talks about how everyone from like ancient Stoic philosophers to modern engineers, they've all used this kind of inverted thinking,
Yeah.
to create outcomes that are, well, that are just more solid.
Give me an example.
Okay, the Stoics, they believed that by like mentally preparing for the worst possible scenario, you actually became more resilient.
Huh. So you're saying we should all become like little stoics.
Maybe not to that extent,
Okay.
but there's something to be said for anticipating challenges, right?
Yeah.
One of the techniques the book talks about is called a pre-mortem analysis.
Now I got to say, that sounds kind of intimidating.
Oh, the name is, yeah, but the concept is actually pretty simple.
Okay.
You essentially imagine that, like, a project or plan has already failed.
Oh, wow.
And then you work backward to try to figure out all the potential reasons why it failed.
So it's like a mental time machine, but for disaster.
Exactly. And by running this pre-mortem, by simulating this failure, you uncover those hidden risks, those weaknesses you might have totally missed otherwise.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about those times when we get caught up in the excitement of a plan and we forget to do that pre-mortem thing?
Oh, yeah.
It feels like there's a psychological trap there.
Right.
It's like, are we just wired to be like overly optimistic?
The book calls it the instant gratification trap.
Hmm.
Our brains are just, they're wired to seek out those quick rewards, those easy solutions.
Right.
And that can blind us to the long-term consequences.
It's like slapping a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. You might feel better for a second,
Right, right.
but you haven't actually fixed the problem.
Exactly. And there are other cognitive biases at play too.
Like what?
Confirmation bias, for example. That's where we tend to gravitate towards information that confirms our existing beliefs, even when those beliefs might be flawed.
So we have to be aware of those biases, like actively challenge our own assumptions.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's where inversion thinking comes in. By forcing ourselves to look at those potential downsides, we can counteract those biases and make more informed decisions.
Okay, I'm starting to see the value in this approach,
Mm.
but let's get practical, right?
Yep.
What are some like specific examples of how we can actually use inversion in our everyday lives?
Mhm.
Because, I mean, we can't exactly run a pre-mortem on everything.
You're right. We can't pre-mortem our whole lives, but there are smaller ways to incorporate inversion thinking. Everyday things.
Okay, like what?
For example, instead of just adding things to your to-do list, try creating a not-to-do list.
A not to-do list.
Yeah.
What would go on that?
Yeah. Things that are harmful, things that are just unproductive.
Yeah.
Maybe it's checking social media first thing in the morning.
Oh, yeah.
Or, getting sucked into those pointless arguments online.
Yep, in there.
By identifying those things and then actively avoiding them, you free up time and energy for things that are actually fulfilling.
That's a great tip. I'm definitely adding that to my toolkit.
So, one of the things that really struck me in the book was how you can use this inversion idea for health.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, I'm always trying to be healthier, but sometimes it feels like I'm You know, I'm trying to add a million new things at once.
Yeah, yeah.
Does inversion like offer a different approach?
It does. It really does. Instead of just focusing on what to add, like to your diet or your workout routine, it makes you think about what you should remove first.
So it's like decluttering your pantry before you go grocery shopping.
Exactly. You got to identify those health saboteurs, the habits, the foods, the things that are holding you back. Maybe it's sugary drinks or late night snacking or even just like sitting down too much.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of a few of those. But how do we like actually figure out what to eliminate? Because it's easy to say, get rid of the bad stuff. But what if I don't even know what those things are?
Well, the book suggests using this tool called a failure scan, but instead of focusing on, projects, you apply it to your health goals.
Okay.
So each day you ask yourself, what could derail my health today?
Okay, so for me, that might be I might be tempted to skip the gym because I have a late meeting.
Right.
Or I know there's a birthday party tonight, so I might eat too much cake.
Exactly. And by thinking about those potential pitfalls beforehand, you can come up with strategies to avoid them. Like maybe you pack a healthy snack for the party, or you schedule your workout for first thing in the morning so you're less likely to skip it.
So it's about being proactive,
Mm.
setting myself up for success instead of just like reacting to temptation when it pops up.
Right, exactly. And this whole inversion thing, you can apply it to other areas of life too, like your career. Instead of just focusing on climbing the ladder, getting that promotion, inversion says, hey, think about what you don't want in a job.
Hmm. That's really interesting. I've always been so focused on like achieving those milestones that I haven't really thought about what I want to avoid.
Yeah, it can be a real game changer. For example, you might realize that you absolutely hate working in a high pressure environment,
Right.
or that that work-life balance is way more important to you than a big paycheck.
It's like those anti-goals we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
By defining those boundaries up front, you can make smarter choices about like
Yeah.
which jobs to go for or even how to negotiate your current role.
Exactly. And you can use it to manage your workload too. Instead of just saying yes to every project that comes across your desk, you could ask yourself, if this project were to like completely derail my week, what would be the reason?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've definitely taken on projects in the past that ended up taking way more time and energy than I thought they would.
Yeah, and by using that inversion, by thinking about those potential derailers, you can be more picky about what you take on, and set realistic expectations.
So it's not just about like avoiding bad things. It's about protecting the good things too.
Precisely. And this can even apply to relationships. Instead of just looking for the perfect partner, inversion says, think about those qualities you absolutely don't want in a relationship.
So are you saying we should all have like a list of deal breakers?
It's not necessarily about having this like rigid list, but it's about being aware of the patterns, the behaviors that are unhealthy for you. Maybe you've been in relationships where there wasn't enough communication or your needs weren't being met.
Yeah, I think we've all had those experiences. But how does inversion help us avoid repeating those patterns?
By identifying those red flags early on, you can be more careful in your choices. Avoid getting involved with people who are likely to trigger those unhealthy dynamics again.
So it's like having a radar for toxic relationships.
Exactly. And this isn't just for romantic relationships. It can work for friendships and family relationships too.
This is all starting to make so much sense. But what about those bigger problems, the ones we see in society?
Yeah.
Can inversion thinking really help us address things like climate change or political polarization?
That's a big question. And while inversion might not have all the answers, it can definitely offer a useful way of looking at
Not
things.
so.
Well, instead of just focusing on finding solutions, we can also ask, what's preventing us from solving these problems?
Yeah.
What are the roadblocks? This can help us understand those systemic barriers and come up with more effective strategies.
So it's like diagnosing the root cause of an illness before you try to treat it.
Exactly. And it's not about giving up or being pessimistic. It's about being realistic about the challenges and approaching them strategically.
What I'm realizing as we're talking is that inversion thinking isn't just about avoiding failure. It's about being more resilient in general.
That's a great point. By anticipating those challenges and coming up with backup plans, we're basically strengthening our mental and emotional immune system.
It's like we're getting vaccinated against those inevitable setbacks that life throws our way.
Exactly. And the more we practice this kind of thinking, the more prepared we'll be no matter what happens.
Okay, so we've talked about the theory, the applications,
Yeah.
but I'm curious to hear some real-world examples of how people have used these inversion tools to actually achieve success.
Well, the book is full of fascinating stories, but one that really stood out to me was this tech startup that used inversion thinking to avoid a major disaster when they launched a new product.
Oh, I'd love to hear about that.
So they were about to launch this new product, and everyone was super excited, but they were also a little nervous because they had some problems with their servers in the past.
Oh, yeah, that's like a nightmare scenario for a tech company.
For sure. So they decided to do a pre-mortem analysis.
Okay.
They imagined that the launch had been a total flop, a complete disaster.
What did they find?
They realized that their system had a single point of failure. If that one server went down, the whole platform would crash.
Oh, wow. That's a huge risk.
It is, but because they identified it in advance, they could take steps to fix it.
Okay.
They invested in redundant systems, backups, so that even if one server failed, the platform would stay up.
So their pre-mortem, it literally saved them from a potential disaster.
Absolutely. And this is just one example of how you can use inversion thinking in business. The book also talks about how companies can use it to hire better, avoid those costly mistakes, and even build a more innovative culture.
It's almost like inversion thinking is a superpower.
It kind of is, right? And the best part is that anyone can develop this superpower. It just takes a little practice.
So how do we actually start incorporating these tools into our lives? I mean, the book have a lot of techniques. Where do we even begin?
I think a good place to start is by picking one area of your life where you're struggling or where you tend to make the most mistakes. Maybe it's your finances, your health, your relationships, or your career.
Okay, so let's say I choose my finances. What's the next step?
You could do a financial failure scan. Ask yourself, what are the biggest threats to my financial well-being? Maybe it's overspending, not saving enough, or making impulsive investments.
And then what?
Once you've figured out those potential pitfalls, you can start brainstorming ways to avoid them. You could make a budget, set up automatic savings, or even, talk to a financial advisor.
It's like we're building a financial safety net.
Exactly. By taking those proactive steps, you're not only protecting yourself from disaster, but you're setting yourself up for success.
I love that. So we've talked about how to apply inversion to specific areas of our lives, but are there any, like, overarching principles that we can use across the board?
One of the most important things is to be consistent. Inversion thinking isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes.
So it's like building a muscle, right? The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly. And just like any new skill, it takes time and effort. But the rewards are definitely worth it.
One thing I'm really appreciating about inversion thinking is that it's not about being perfect. It's about being prepared.
That's so important. We all make mistakes. We all experience setbacks. But the goal isn't to avoid those things completely. It's to minimize the damage and bounce back faster.
It's not about being invincible. It's about being resilient.
Exactly. And by adopting that mindset, we can face those challenges with more confidence.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like I have a whole new way of looking at things.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore in this book. Like how inversion thinking can be used for creativity, innovation, and even personal growth.
Well, I can't wait to dive into those topics in our next segment. This has been a truly eye-opening conversation.
We've talked about a lot, premortems, not to-do lists, even applying inversion to like our health and relationships.
Yeah.
But there's this one area I'm really curious about. How can we use this kind of thinking to break those bad habits, or get ourselves out of those toxic situations?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Because it's something we all struggle with, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the book actually has a whole section on this. It basically argues that those negative patterns, those habits, they can be a huge drain on our energy,
Right.
and our potential.
Makes sense, right? If you're constantly fighting those internal demons or like dealing with drama, it's hard to focus on your goals.
Exactly. And the book suggests that inversion thinking can help us break free from those cycles in a few ways.
Okay, I'm all ears. Where do we even begin?
Well, the first step is recognition. The book actually has this checklist of like red flags that can signal a bad habit or a toxic environment. It's about paying attention to those subtle signs that something's not right.
Like, what kind of red flags? Give me an example.
Sure. Think about a time when you felt like constantly drained or demoralized after talking to a particular person,
Right.
or maybe you notice this pattern of conflict or drama in a certain group.
Mm.
Those could be signs that the environment itself is toxic.
Or maybe you find yourself like constantly justifying something, but it just feels a little off, ethically speaking.
Exactly. It's about trusting your gut, and
Yeah.
recognizing those warning signs before things get worse.
So once we've identified those red flags, how does inversion thinking help us actually avoid those situations or break those habits?
That's where the action part of inversion comes in. And the book suggests a few strategies, one of the most powerful being creating boundaries.
Boundaries. I've heard that a lot, but it can feel a little vague. How do we actually set boundaries in a way that like makes a real difference?
It really depends on the situation. If it's a toxic person, it might mean, limiting how much you interact with them or being very clear about what behavior is okay and what's not.
So it's not about like cutting people out completely, but it's about managing those interactions.
Right, exactly. And sometimes it might even mean just getting out of that situation entirely.
Okay, so boundaries are key. What else does the book recommend?
Another technique is it's called barrier building. It's about creating, physical or even digital obstacles that make it harder to fall back into those bad habits.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. Let's say you're trying to break a social media addiction.
Yeah.
A barrier might be deleting those apps from your phone or using one of those website blocker things to keep you from going to those sites.
It's like removing the temptation altogether, right?
Yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. And sometimes it's about making positive barriers too. Things that, encourage good habits, like putting your running shoes by the door so you're more likely to go for a run,
Right.
or prepping healthy meals in advance so you don't order takeout.
It's like we're setting ourselves up for success,
Right.
designing our environment to support our goals.
Right. And remember, the book emphasizes that this isn't about being perfect.
Yeah.
We all slip up.
Totally.
It's about having those strategies in place so you can catch yourself and go back on track.
It's like having a safety net for our habits.
Exactly. And speaking of habits, the book also talks about the power of substitution. Instead of just trying to get rid of a bad habit, you replace it with something healthier.
Okay, that makes sense. What's an example of that?
Well, if you're trying to quit smoking, you might chew gum or suck on hard candy when you get a craving.
Mhm.
Or if you're trying to cut back on caffeine, you could switch to herbal tea or decaf coffee.
So it's about finding those healthier ways to like
Mhm.
satisfy that urge, right?
Right. And sometimes the substitution isn't about a specific activity. It's about shifting your mindset. The book talks about replacing negative self-talk with, more positive and encouraging thoughts.
That's so important. Our thoughts can really sabotage us, even when we're trying our best.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where that inversion mindset can be so helpful. Instead of focusing on what you don't want, you focus on what you do want.
It's like flipping the script in your head, right?
Mhm.
Instead of saying, I don't want to be stressed, you say, I want to feel calm and focused.
Exactly. And by focusing on those positive outcomes, you're more likely to make them happen.
It's like the law of attraction, but with an inversion twist.
I like that. And remember, all these strategies, boundaries, barriers, substitution, mindset shifts, they all work together to create a more resilient, more empowered you.
You know, I got to say, this whole conversation has been such an eye-opener. It's like you've given me a whole new way of looking at the world.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, inversion isn't just about avoiding the bad stuff. It's about creating space for the good stuff.
It's like clearing out the clutter to make room for something new and amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by using this way of thinking, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're also setting yourself up for greater success and fulfillment in all areas of your life.
This has been such a valuable deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much, and I have all these practical tips I can start using right away.
It's been great talking with you. And remember, this inversion journey, it's ongoing. There's always more to learn and explore.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with me and with our listeners. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep inverting your thinking to create a more fulfilling, more successful life.